This is one of the giant heads of the Olmec culture, located in the National Anthropology Museum in Mexico City. It's about 8 feet tall, made of basalt stone, and most of these were actually found buried within the last 100 years. So whether they were buried on purpose by a later culture than the Olmec, or whether they simply sank into the jungle at this point is unknown. But there are many, many of these. You see the carving, the pitting, and on the back are these curious depressions. Also these very famous little jade figures of the Olmec. You see some have obvious elongated heads. Also amongst the Olmec, there are obvious signs in the sculpture of cranial deformation or elongated heads, probably only amongst the royal class, which is what we also find in other cultures around the world that perform cranial deformation. It was only for the royalty. And then we find the actual examples of cranial deformation among the Olmec people. You can see that these are clearly cradle-boarded, or examples of cranial deformation. Nothing profound in terms of size of the skull, or even the shape. So what we've been able to see is cranial deformation was performed by at least 3 cultures in ancient Mexico: the Olmec, the Maya, and the latter one, whose name I didn't really account for, read properly. But it was only done, like anywhere else on the planet, cranial deformation was only done on the royal people, the priestly class, the chiefly class, to distinguish themselves from the commoners. And that's what we find, where we find cranial deformation on 6 of the 7 continents on this planet. And the most common timeline seems to be, for some reason, 2,000 years ago. I don't think there's a necessary connection with that. But also, the most profound elongated skulls on the planet clearly are the Paracas from the coast of Peru. This is the massive sculpture out of basalt stone. The figure is Tlaloc, which is the rain god. This little girl will give you an indication of the scale of it. You can see there's been a lot of damage. The weight of it, conservatively, I would think at least 60 tons. It was found outside Mexico City, lying flat on its back and abandoned for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and then was finally brought here to the Museum of Anthropology. Doubtful that it's from the Aztec period. It could be Toltec, which is older, or the Teotihuacan people. We're on the Altiplano outside of Mexico City. It's slightly higher than Mexico City itself, and the site we're at is called Tula. But Tula is a Spanish name. The original name in the Aztec language of Nahua is Tolan, and Tolan simply means city or the city. It's a site that's older than the Aztec. It goes back at least as far as what we call the Toltec civilization, which preceded the Aztecs, and this is where we find the very famous so-called Atlantean figures made of basalt stone.
A little higher.
That's
okay.
booty there.
There you go. Gotcha. See the crack.
So the local explanation as to what these represent are not Atlantean people, they're not aliens, but they're actually Toltec warriors. The headdress, you see snakeskin, and then you see feathers, so that's the symbol of Quetzalcoatl. And then these are thought to be arrows. And then this is said to be a crossbow, a little tiny crossbow whose mechanism is a rubber band, because native rubber is grown in the jungles of Mexico. And then the shield on the back, because he can't hold anything more than one thing in one hand at one time. And then in front, you have the butterfly shape, which is the chest plate that protects the warrior from being pierced in the heart with any kind of weapon, and it was made out of obsidian. So again, you see the snakeskin and the feathers representing a disciple of Quetzalcoatl. So of course you do have to make up your own mind, but which would you believe? The local story that they represent warriors holding a type of bow and arrow with a chest plate and then a shield behind, or what would appear to be more fanciful, which is that they are aliens or Atlanteans or something with laser beams. Personally, I go for the former, and I always listen to local knowledge. This is the famous Avenue of the Dead at Teotihuacan outside Mexico City. It was built supposedly by the Toltec civilization maybe 2,000 years ago, and the famous Aztecs passed by this area as they were looking for their new homeland, which is present-day Mexico City, what was called Tenochtitlan, which means the place or the land of prophecy, or the place or land of the prophets. So it's actually likely that this little pyramid, which was built in front of the temple of Quetzalcoatl, or the plumed serpent, was done so on purpose to hide or partially isolate the temple of Quetzalcoatl in behind, because it's likely that it, in fact, was the most sacred place at Teotihuacan and could possibly be the oldest. The construction technique used at the temple of Quetzalcoatl is very different than the later works that we see, these little pyramidal structures that you see there. Lots of mortar used in construction. So as you can see, this temple structure was built right in front of the actual temple of Quetzalcoatl that has all of this not only amazing carving, but also possibly evidence of megalithic works. So as you can see, the staircase was made of quite homogeneous material. It looks like it all came from the same quarry. There was no mortar used in that lower section of intact staircase. Then all the material above is very inferior. And again, it's likely that the stone-on-stone contact aspects were original. Something devastating happened to the structure. And then the Toltec rebuilt in the area, incorporating the ancient parts. And that's what we find in Peru, Bolivia, Egypt, Lebanon, any place where there's an ancient site where there are aspects of megalithic construction. Temple of the Sun, supposedly, behind us. And now we're approaching the Temple of the Moon here at Teotihuacan, outside Mexico City. Built, supposedly, not by the Aztecs, but by their predecessors, who were called the Toltecs, even though we don't know what they called themselves. The Aztecs arrived later, found their constructions, and said, these people are artisans. And therefore, that's why they called them the Toltec. So what's interesting about the Temple of the Moon, aside from the fact that it's huge, it was a major engineering and architectural feat by the Toltec people, possibly 2,000 or more years ago, is you'll notice the difference in construction technique. You see those very nice cube-like blocks for the stairway. The stairway has, of course, been reconstructed, but they are very different than the form of construction of the pyramid itself, which is quite inferior, utilizing a lot of mortar. And the mortar they made is actually volcanic ash. And I believe they added lime to it to make it hard. And then we have the Temple of the Sun, which is much, much bigger. Massive scale, footprint, several acres. Another interesting aspect about Teotihuacan is that it seems to have been designed on purpose to have an acoustic quality to it. And that is why you have the proportions of these big, but especially these little pyramids. If you stand on this platform coming up here and clap your hands, there's an echo. And this was likely where the great orator would stand in order to make pronouncements to the people who could have been sitting on the staircases and the different levels of these mini pyramidal structures here at Teotihuacan. We're in the pyramidal structure called Cholula, or at Cholula in Mexico. It's the largest pyramidal structure in the world, footprint of 45 acres, whereas the Great Pyramid in Egypt has a footprint of 13 acres. It's not a true pyramid as such, but it's one of the largest earthworks on the planet. So the tunnel itself is not really ancient, but it was a way for archaeologists, likely in the 19th century, to be able to carve into the pyramidal structure and find the different levels, because it's like layers of an onion. Every layer you go into is an older pyramidal structure. The material is like volcanic ash, so it's really easy to carve and shape. In total, there's something like 8 kilometers or 5 miles of tunnels that they carved. Yeah.
Holy mackerel. Back into the light.
So this whole hill you're looking at is a human-made construction. Again, the footprint, 45 acres, whereas the Great Pyramid in Egypt is about 13 acres. So in terms of volume, it's the largest pyramidal structure on the planet. So again, this is the exterior, probably the last phase of construction, but there are other pyramidal structures inside of it. Over the course of extensive amount of time, one was built on top of the other, and then on top of the other.
Yeah, you can see photographs 100 times and really see it.
This is one of the famous Olmec ball player heads, about 3,000 years old. And Ed, who was our geologist, has just told us that the material it's made out of is volcanic tuff. It's not basalt. Volcanic tuff is not that hard a material, so it is quite conceivable that even with Bronze Age tools or stone tools, that these Olmec people could have shaped these enormous sculptures. We're going to see, though, if there are also basalt ones, basalt being a much harder stone. So here we are in the Jalapa Museum, and we'll see what else we can find. So the Olmec are still a big mystery. They are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, cultures in what we call Mexico, dating back at least 3,000 years. We're an older culture than the Maya, the Toltec, the Teotihuacan, and the Aztec. And Olmec simply means the rubber people, and that was an archaeological name given to them because no one knows what they called themselves. We're in the Jalapa Museum on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and this museum is phenomenal. It's a huge collection of Olmec and other culture, art, stone. The huge Olmec heads are here, undercover, being protected. This is a state-of-the-art museum, as fine as any you would find on the planet. And, interestingly, we also find examples of cranial deformation and elongated heads. So this is the Zapotal culture. You can see the flattening of the top of the head here. Then somewhat like we see on the coast of Peru, somewhat like the Paracas, but the Paracas more extreme. And then an even greater example, again, similar to what we call the cone heads of Paracas in Peru. So here we have the Veracruz culture, the center of, or central area of Veracruz, from 600 to 900 AD. And this extremely altered human skull, with 3 suture lines instead of the normal 2. So from the same island, or same area, but on an island called the Island of Idols, here we have what a normal human skull looks like. There you have the one suture and another suture there. That's what every normal human skull looks like. But then we have this one. You can see it has an extra suture going from this suture forward. And you can see the shape is clearly altered. And here again from the Island of Idols, 900 to 900 AD to about 1521 AD. And it is missing the sagittal suture that should be running this way. And another one from the Island of Idols, again lacking the sagittal suture. Another point about the giant heads is that most archaeologists or people in general think that the noses are flat, but in the fact, or in many cases, the reasoning is because of the shape of the stone itself. You see, as I come down, the sculptor possibly couldn't project the nose out too far because of the nature of the stone. Maybe this here was the flat surface of the stone, because other sculptures of the Olmec depicting their faces show almost typical noses of most other cultures, not flat.
Oh, sí, 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 sí. Como the fairies. Yes, he was a spirit, right?
But it's a circle of fire.
When was this?
Es una bola de fuego.
¿Hace cuánto, José?
In the year 1996, 1996.
6 balls of firelight
Six balls of fire here in this pyramid.
landed on this pyramid.
En esta pirámide.
In this pyramid, up this pyramid, the people is scared. The people
Run away?
run away, allowed, allowed, no return to house. Together, every people asking him, what's happened with the pyramid? What's happened with that ball game? Where it came from? I don't know. It's fantastic. But that pyramid had a power. Somebody tell that.
Here we have quadcopter footage of the site of La Venta, which is an ancient Olmec site. And my quadcopter, called Pachacutec, is now approaching an artificial hill created by the Olmec people. Now, it doesn't look like much, but the intriguing thing was that when I first started to fly over this hill, I lost contact with the quadcopter, as if there was some kind of energetic something going on this hill, and that was actually confirmed by our guide in the previous clip with the red hat. Now, the only really interesting things aside from the energetic component here are the Olmec heads and other stoneworks. It's not really that intriguing a site. I wouldn't go out of my way to visit it again, but it's an interesting place to see at least once in your life, because the surrounding area as well is quite intriguing. There's a lot of jungle in the area, unfortunately a lot of urban areas too. And this is one of the interesting Olmec heads, one of several that are on location. Unfortunately, these are concrete copies because the originals are in museums. But all in all, quite an intriguing site. These copies are exact duplicates, great detail. And again, you can see the energetic hill is in the background. Hugh Newman's quadcopter as well had major problems initially. So, as Hugh Newman was explaining, during the initial archaeological work being done here at Comalcalco, supposedly a number of baked clay bricks used in the construction, especially of probably the pyramid we're coming up to, showed different forms of writing. Mayan, obviously, because this is a Maya site, but also supposedly Old World, as in, as he previously discussed, Egyptian, maybe even Chinese, Phoenician, etc. But the museum had no examples. So you have to conclude either that the story is a fabrication, or that these examples of writing which don't fit the normal Mesoamerican history have been hidden away on purpose. And what we've seen is that the Olmec, there are no really sophisticated constructions at all. The piles of dirt and things like that. Of course, the big stone heads, but no construction of any sophistication whatsoever as compared to this, which is more of the classic Maya work. So this could be evidence of one of the ancient ball courts with howler monkeys in the background. And it's believed that the Olmec may have invented the ball court process, but it was perfected by the Maya later. So what I've been looking for is evidence of the arrival of what is called the plumed serpent, known to the Maya as Kukulkan, and to the Aztec and possibly the Teotihuacan culture as Quetzalcoatl. And he is said to have been a light-skinned man with a full beard who came as a teacher from a distant land. Amongst the Olmec, there's almost zero evidence of his existence, but once you get into the Maya and the Teotihuacan and the Aztec, there's substantial evidence, because you see these figures with full beards, which Native Americans in general can't grow to this very day. So that possibly could give us a date as to his arrival, maybe around, literally around the time of Christ, but I'm definitely not saying that it was Christ. But that sort of timeline, 100 BC to 100 AD. So we have two forms of building technology here, predominantly the work of the Maya, and that's stucco and also baked clay bricks. No stone whatsoever, because there is no stone in this area. So that is one thing that makes this this complex kind of interesting, in that it's different to other sites where we see a lot of volcanic stone incorporated, but since there's none in the area, of course, they're going to use what they have, and that's clay and volcanic ash mixed with lime to make a primitive kind of concrete. So we are looking at the plausibility that there was a great light-skinned teacher or teachers who had a full beard around the time of 100 BC to 100 AD. He or they would have first appeared in what we call Peru, and would have taught what would become the Inca, because the Inca more or less formulated during that time. Their knowledge level was way beyond anybody in the area. And then he or they traveled to the coast at the border of Peru and Ecuador, sailed to the northwest, and wound up where we are in this part of Mesoamerica, the Gulf Coast area of Mexico. And there, to the Maya, he became known as Kukulkan, and then he traveled onwards northwest into what is now called Mexico City, and there he became Quetzalcoatl, or they. at Palenque, which is on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. Steamy jungle area. This is one of the great Mayan cities. Lord Pakal, who was the most famous ruler, was entombed inside this pyramid. In fact, there's a staircase from the top, which is now closed. 2 levels down, staircase down that way, turning 180 degrees, and then that way. And that's where his limestone sarcophagus lined in cinnabar, which is a mercury oxide, is located. And then his body was found, of course, inside this massive limestone box. No evidence so far of any lost ancient high technology at use here. It's standard Mayan construction of stone and mortar, but spectacular sight. The beauty is that it's built on top of a hill, and that's intact rainforest in behind. And this could be the first sign of megalithic elements, as in that staircase. So you see, here's the standard technology of the Maya. But then when we get to this staircase, it's quite curious. These blocks might have originally fitted together very well. So if you only have one example of possible megalithic elements, like we just saw, then that could be coincidence. But what about when it starts repeating, like here, in that staircase? So if you have one example of possible more advanced stoneworking at a site, then that could be coincidence. But now we're seeing more. We're seeing a difference in these two staircases that are right next to each other. Have a look. So again, standard Mayan construction, and in the staircase, but when we turn left, all of a sudden we have bigger blocks that look like they could have originally been precisely cut and then were reassembled as you see them now. So what you're hearing in the background is the sound of howler monkeys living in the tree canopy here. Same phenomenon you see at Tikal in Guatemala, another huge Mayan site. So another area where we could have megalithic elements, because once again you have relatively small stone, roughly cut, bonded together with some kind of lime or clay or other material, and then contrasted with what you're about to see. So the standard form of construction, and then this. Now we have example number 5 of something which doesn't fit the normal construction pattern. Above you have small stones. Below you have much bigger stones. Some of them still fitting together reasonably well, but it looks obviously like the lower section has been destroyed or damaged and then possibly reconstructed. But you definitely see, once again, someone put a lot of effort into cutting these bigger blocks as compared to the one would presume would be later construction out of much smaller things. Also, the two buildings that seem to have the larger stones in their construction are in the core of Palenque, and that's common. As in Machu Picchu, what we find is the core is megalithic. It's the oldest part, and then the 90% that was built afterwards by the Inca spreads out from the core. And here too, the core so far has 5 examples of larger than normal stone construction. Everything else is the smaller type, and here's a final look. So that's the kind of stuff you really want to find. If you see a consistent building style, or you see a gradual increase in efficiency and quality of a building style, then you can say, well, the foundation is primitive and was made by these people, and then either their descendants or others who moved in or other influences allowed for increased quality. When you find big slabs like that in the two core buildings of a place, really badly damaged, as if something cataclysmic maybe had happened to them, and then you have inferior work above, then that does suggest that you're looking quite possibly at 2 completely different cultures. The one doing the large slab work being clearly superior to the one that did the regular, somewhat rough stone and mortar work. There are now more than 800 of my videos at Hidden Inca Videos on YouTube, or sorry, Brian Forster on YouTube, or www.hiddeninCatours.com, or www.hiddenhumanhistory.com. And what we try to do is analyze these magical and also somewhat enigmatic places and see if standard archaeology stands up 100% to what we're looking at, or if they've missed certain aspects. And when it comes to the engineering and stone masonry aspects, quite often they miss critical stuff that could make these sites far more older, and some aspects of the construction having been made by cultures that they have no idea, don't recognize, and have no clue as to who they were or when they were here. This is the Temple of the Moon at Teotihuacan, Notice how the staircase construction is completely different from the rest of the structure. And then at the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, notice the large blocks that appear to have originally been in place, but now are damaged and on the ground. And then we have the massive Pyramid of the Sun. Again, notice the staircase is different in construction than the rest of the building. And as we approach the Pyramid of the Sun, we see that the staircase is made of cut, cube-like blocks, where the rest of the building is made of simple volcanic stone. And here we see the Pyramid of the Sun from the Pyramid of the Moon, massive in scale. And again, as we go backwards, we see the immensity of the Pyramid of the Sun amongst these smaller temple structures. Now at the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, again, the staircase is made of cut blocks. And yet the rest of the construction is really quite simplistic, except for those large cut stones there. This is a typical staircase located at Teotihuacan of mixed material. And one very large stone here that clearly was originally used in the construction but now isn't. And now we are approaching the Temple of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Moon, and this gives you a look at most of the entire work located at Teotihuacan, about 2 hours outside of Mexico City. This is a standard staircase, very crudely made. And here in behind, again, the fine cut blocks of the staircase at the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. Compare it to the other rather crude construction that is around it. And again, here we focus in on the staircase at the Pyramid of the Sun. Cut cube-like blocks. And looking down, we're going to see the typical kind of staircase, lots of mortar and crudely put together. We are now at Tula, which also is about 2 hours away from Mexico City, but in a completely different direction. This is where we find the so-called Atlantean statues, which was a term made up by a 19th century British or American writer. We'll actually see that these statues have nothing to do with Atlantis. That was just a fancy term used and now, unfortunately, has stuck. Again, we can see that cube-like stones seem to have been recycled in parts of the staircase. And now we approach the structures or statues themselves, made of very hard basalt stone, which is not found locally. You see that each one of these statues is made up of at least 4 different sections. They were found by archaeologists having fallen down, likely the result of the Spanish invaders. And these are called the Atlantean warriors. Indeed, they were warriors, but they were warriors of Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent. again, having nothing to do with Atlantis, and then this curious object carried in the right hand. Now, some people have claimed that it's some kind of laser weapon. In fact, it was likely a very early, small type of crossbow. And here we have detail of the figures themselves. Notice the headdress is a mixture of feathers and serpent scales. So that's the plumed serpent. And then here we get a close-up of a relief carving of one of the warriors, likely of the Toltec civilization. As the sun goes down, we get our last glimpse of Tula. Notice these protruding knob-like things. These stones look like they lock together, one on top of another, on top of another. And in the left hand, the warrior is carrying a bundle of small arrows to go with the little crossbow. That is local oral tradition. So we'll be going back to Mexico in February 2019. Thank you. Hi, this is Brian Forrester of HiddenIncaTours.com, and today we are exploring Palenque in Mexico. Palenque was one of the great Mayan constructions located in the jungle in the eastern part of Mexico. And this actually is where Lord Pakal, the most famous Maya of the area, was buried. But what we're looking for today are examples of lost ancient high technology. You can see here that this staircase is quite crude in construction, with a lot of mortar made from volcanic ash. And this is a typical Mayan type of construction. You see relatively small stones, a lot of clay mortar, and then also stucco put on the outside in order to be able to hide the workmanship below. This is an example of a wall that still has the mortar on it and the strange T-shaped depression in the stone work. But now look at those stones in front. Those are massive in size. Again, you see the relatively rough construction work here, and then big slabs in the background at the bottom there. And here, large stone blocks on the right side that have been put back together. They were probably much tighter fitting in the past, and then much rougher work on the left-hand side. How can these be from the same time period? And now here, we're walking through part of this very large complex. And again, look at the stones that make up the staircase. They're very large, relatively, and very tight-fitting. And again, walking through the complex, you see quite rough work, some modern repair, and then these big blocks that make up this staircase. It's all limestone material, quite likely local, but why would you have such big blocks incorporated in a staircase like that when all of the rest of the work is relatively crude? And here, we're going to another staircase almost right next door, and notice that it is made of smaller stones with lots of mortar. Why two types of constructions in the same location? And again, quite massive stones making up this staircase, with some likely later, cruder repair work. Here, rough work again. And this gives you simply an overview of what the jungle of Palenque looks like and the very organic nature of the construction of this ancient Maya location. There are also tunnel systems like this. This is actually where the people slept. These were the bedrooms because the jungle area is quite hot and it's always nice and cool inside here. And as we continue through the tunnels, with way too many tourists for my liking, here we see a large slab of stone. And then walking through more of the complex, you see in general relatively small stonework, but beautiful looking edifices. And here, a small temple of some kind, and a relatively rough altar. Now we explore deeper into the jungle part of Palenque. Only 10% of it has been excavated, so that means the majority of it is still overgrown with jungle foliation. And going up a staircase, again, which is relatively crude in construction. We get to this large composition of stone, and this is a frieze or a relief carving of a Mayan noble of some kind, supposedly about to be eaten by a crocodile or alligator. Then descending back out of the jungle and into the main complex again. This actually is the core part of Palenque, where those large stone slabs were that made up the staircases. And here again, some very large slabs of limestone that don't match with the composition of the rest of the building. Notice that they fit tightly relatively compared to the rough work in the background, and some of them are damaged with large cracks in them and are even broken. Again, the rougher Mayan work, and then the large interlocking slabs of stone. I theorize that these large slabs are from a much older time period and that Palenque was found by the Mayan as an abandoned, somewhat megalithic site. And next door to where that building was, again, rough construction on the right, and then these very large slabs of stone that no longer fit together, almost stacked up as if they're simply a pile of what once used to be a very tight-fitting, relatively large structure. And now we're starting to exit Palenque, which is quite a massive site. Again, the farther we get from the core, the rougher the work we see. That's generally what we find at megalithic sites. The core tends to be megalithic and the oldest part, and then the farther out you go from the core, the rougher work we see made by the culture, in this case the Maya, or in the case of Cusco, the Inca, or in the case of Egypt, the dynastic Egyptians. Palenque is a beautiful location, well worth visiting if you're in Mexico. And we make one trip there per year. In 2018, it was in January where I took this film footage. And in 2019, it will be in February. This video is a series of videos of material that I shot during the January 2018 tour, and from it will be multiple videos about signs of lost ancient high technology. So please consider joining us in Mexico, February 2019 at hiddenincatours.com. It's another edition of hiddenincatours.com. This is the somewhat famous site of Uxmal in the Yucatan, and this is called the Pyramid of the Magicians. Now, as you see, the staircase appears to be quite finely done of cube-like blocks, but then the interior of the pyramidal structure is very rough. You can see it's massive in scale, but its construction is basically rough stone and concrete. And as we go along the side of it, again you see its immenseness, but it's not that well done. But now we're going to focus on the back side. And here you can see some larger cube-like blocks that look like they've been reassembled. And here again you see on the left reasonably large cube-like blocks, and then rough to the right. And then here, in terms of construction, again, the lower area is much finer than the upper area. So this leads me to believe that Uxmal was built in two different time periods, the rougher work by the Maya on the right and reconstruction efforts by them on the left. Here again we see some large blocks there stacked on top of each other, and here reassembly. But then if you look at the upper area, it's much rougher than the first level. And here again, reassembly of blocks that look like they had to have been cut by some kind of saw, while the Maya only had obsidian tools. So it is quite likely that they discovered a much older site and then simply rebuilt it and then did their construction work on top and to the side. As we walk up this staircase, again, you can see some reasonably large stones that appear to have been reassembled in place. And here again, you see the staircase at the back is quite well done, but the work on the side is quite crude. And another example of this, where you have reasonably fine stone construction work on the bottom, and then the second level is much rougher. So, like in Peru and Bolivia and Egypt and other locations, I'm seeing evidence that there was a much more ancient site than the Maya, but the Maya found it in disrepair and then rebuilt it. And this wall here is a classic example of that. Look at the cube-shaped blocks compared to the rough fill on the surface. And here, another example of that. Large stones mixed with basically just rough rocks. And finally, the back side, or actually left side of the pyramid. And again, we see this fine construction mixed in with very rough work. So I hope you'll consider joining us in Mexico, February 2019. Welcome once again to hiddenincatours.com, and today we're exploring Mitla in Oaxaca. Now, Mitla is not a site that is very commonly visited, but there are lots of anomalies here. Notice the size of these massive blocks on top of the wall as compared to the relatively crude work elsewhere. So this clearly seems to be a site that was found by the local native people and then rebuilt. Again, as we walk through this passageway, you see the very crude walls created by the local native people. And then in contrast, you see the size of this 6-ton block, which is a lintel. And here we're exploring more of it. And as time goes on, you'll see the difference again in construction style. Massive basalt blocks as headers, sometimes down at the foundation, and then very rough work in between. Here again, you see the large blocks on top and the relatively crude work below. It looks like it has been reassembled and could have been the victim of an ancient cataclysm thousands of years before the time of the local native people, who were called the Zapotecs and the Mixtecs. There are also present a number of these columns made of solid basalt. They are between 8 and 10 feet high, and the quarry from which the basalt comes from is at least 2 miles away. There are no native trees that grow in the area to be used as log rollers, so how were they moved? And then another giant lintel you'll see, solid basalt, and then much cruder work which came later. Look at the amount of mortar utilized and the very rough shapes of the stones. And here again, we see possible reassembly in the upper area and very crude work below. Now this is the kind of evidence we see definitely in Peru, Bolivia, Egypt, and Lebanon, but I was quite surprised to find it in Mexico. And here again, this shows you one of the large courtyard, a large pillar in the background, a giant stone there on the lower left, and then much cruder work in the rest of the area. And here, a large block that looks like it had to have been cut by advanced tools, inserted into a rough wall. And here are more of these massive basalt columns, and then there's a lintel to the right-hand side, one of the stones weighing at least 18 tons. And here, with the foundation, again you notice very large, super tight-fitting blocks. You can barely pass a piece of paper in the joints, if at all. And here, another very rough wall, and a massive lintel, and more of the giant columns. Sorry about the sound of the dog. And here again, look at the base. Very tight-fitting blocks and very rough work above it. Clearly done by two very different cultures. The work above by relatively technologically primitive people, the work below by some advanced civilization living in Oaxaca, Mexico. And here, the church, which is next door, you can tell that the church was built using stone that had already been cut and was found locally. And again, a very rough wall, and then a lintel weighing at least 6 tons. And on the other end of the archaeological site, another giant column. And finally, another look at these tall columns and the lintel comprised of huge cut stones. So this is the Aswan Quarry, located in the southernmost part of Egypt. Solid granite, and this quarry has been used for several thousand years. The question is, how many thousands of years? These are the standard techniques used by the dynastic Egyptians for quarrying stone. And this as well. You see, very crude work, but what we're going to see is phenomenal.
About an hour, I'll have my obelisk ready.
Harder.
Now, honestly, that is how some Egyptologists think that the quarrying was done in the Aswan area. What we do find are these mysterious scoop marks, and what technology this was is still unknown. But it's clearly an example of lost ancient technology as compared, again, to the simple method used by the dynastic Egyptians of putting wedges in. So here we see side by side. On the right, you see the Egyptian technique. On the left, lost ancient high technology technique. So it's been described as scooping, but was it some kind of abrasive machine at work? Or something even more bizarre than that? Possibly a mechanism that emitted an energy field of some kind, destabilizing the quartz in the granite and causing the granite to turn into sand. Now here we're looking into the actual trough area of the 1,200 ton obelisk that was never completed. 1,200 tons. And here we get another visual look of the obelisk in its entirety, never completed. It's as if work suddenly stopped on this massive project. And again, these intriguing, even so-called scoop marks that we see in many different areas of the quarry, but especially where the unfinished giant obelisk is. Here you see the trough on the right side, and then here you see the trough on the left side, again with these very interesting even indentations. And this is called a test pit that goes down several feet. A human being could barely fit inside there, let alone try to work the surfaces. And again, these very intriguing, even marks and the complexity of the Aswan quarry itself. So let's see how the people with hand tools are now making progress. completely ridiculous to think that that was the technique. This again, you see where wedges were put in by the dynastic Egyptians and even Romans to break stone. And then a smaller obelisk that also was never completed. These intriguing scoop marks. You can see they were working on both sides, the left and right, and they were almost able to release the stone from the quarry. But something happened in Aswan that stopped the work, and the question is, what was it? Let's again see how the people using hand tools are making out.
There's nothing else here. Thank you, Anita.
There could be no question but that there was a very advanced technological civilization in ancient Egypt before the pharaohs. The reason this obelisk was not finished could have been the presence of this crack that appeared. And so, we're hopeful that in April of 2019 you'll be able to join us and see these amazing sights for yourself, because being there is completely different than simply watching a video, which is kind of obvious, but that is the case. And this is the interior of the Great Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Now, Jason here, who was on our recent tour in March 2018, is inspecting this giant granite unfinished box. And what's amazing about this is we'll see obvious signs of lost ancient high technology, like that saw mark you see in the center of the video. Now, I think on purpose, they pushed this unfinished box against a wall so that you wouldn't inspect these amazing saw marks. But what we see are two circular saws working, one on top, one on the bottom, obviously powered by some kind of machine, and rapidly cutting through this granite, which is 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale, with diamond being 10. You can see that the top saw started to veer off course, cutting into the main part of the block, and then it wound up snapping half of the lid off. The lid was going to be from the same piece of stone, from the bottom, to be placed on the top. And now, right next to it, we see another granite box, and this is a different type of saw working, almost like a bandsaw. Again, clearly working at high speed, and in terms of modern technology, that would require diamonds, a diamond-encrusted blade. Such a thing did not exist during dynastic times, so we have to consider the idea that these saw marks are from a much older civilization that had lost ancient high technology. Here again, the multiple saw marks. And then somewhat nearby is this basalt box. And what you can tell from here, again, is that the box itself had to have been made using advanced technology, and this object was found by the dynastic Egyptians, and then they simply carved these shallow vertical lines into the surface, probably with relatively crude tools, possibly Bronze Age, maybe even iron, but the lightness of the lines means that they were done more recently than the shaping of the box itself. So for the moment, that's it for the first floor of the museum, and now we're going upstairs to visit the second floor. And what we first encounter are a number of wooden sarcophagi. But as we go to explore these sarcophagi, we encounter one of the most enigmatic of all objects in the museum. Aside from this 10-foot long wooden sarcophagus, of which there are at least two. Were there people actually that tall who fit in these sarcophagi? But what we encounter is the amazing so-called schist disk, and we'll go more into detail with that after we observe another one or two of the massive sarcophagi made out of wood from the dynastic period. Here are normal size ones, between 5 feet and 6 feet tall. And then this huge one, which is 10 to 12 feet tall. Is it simply a symbolic sarcophagus? So back to the so-called schist disk. It's called a schist disk because the archaeologists believe that it was made out of a stone called schist, but our geologist, Susan Moore, who is an expert, of course, on stone, believes that it's actually metamorphosed clay of some kind. That would mean that it would be very, very dense, and also would be able to resonate. So this object, whatever it was, clearly rotated, but the strange thing is that the fins, 3 of them that you see there, don't angle. So it isn't apparent whether it was pulling or pushing air or water. Maybe it was simply made to set up some kind of vibration. So when we look at the profile here, unfortunately it was found broken and very badly repaired, but again you can see it's a very complex piece of work. And it was found along in a cache with 30,000 to 40,000 turned very hard stone bowls and plates that could only have been made using lathes of some kind. And even the labels on these objects state that they're likely from the pre-dynastic or archaic period. So here's an approach again to the so-called schist disk. They put it here so that the sun shines on it, I think on purpose, so that it's very difficult to properly photograph. The fact that it's even still on display is quite amazing because it's very much an anomalous object which does not fit into either the time frame or the technology of the dynastic Egyptians. And here are some of the turned objects. These, again, are likely quite hard stone, and you can see they're perfectly bilaterally symmetrical, so they would have had to have been made on lathes. Since the archaeologists are stating that these are from the archaic period, that means that they were constructed prior to the invention of the potter's wheel. And a lathe is a far more complex machine than a potter's wheel. These could have been partially made on a lathe and then partially hand done because of the strange spouts that project off. But this fascinating object that has 5 lobes, again, appears to have been made at least partially on some kind of ancient lathe device. And these are very hard granite, syenite, and diorite bowls and other vessels that could only have been made, again, on a lathe of some kind. Now the idea that the lathes were operated by foot or hand are quite ridiculous, because in order to properly shape something like this, you have to have relatively high speed. So that means some kind of motor or engine would be involved, and those did not exist during the dynastic time period. And once again, many more of these objects. There are approximately 50 on display, but again, the cache that was found at Saqqara the number of objects found was between 30,000 and 40,000. Many of them were found damaged or broken, and others unfinished. And here are some pottery vessels. These are from the dynastic time period. So it's very interesting that the ones that were turned on the lathe are even listed as being pre-dynastic, and yet these relatively crude pottery ones are from the later dynastic period. So what it's telling us, including this fascinating object here, is that the history of Egypt is far older and far more complex than most academics will state. And that's why these objects sitting in plain sight are fascinating and show us that it's very possible that there was a high-tech civilization existing 12,000 plus years ago in Egypt, and that these objects were inherited by the later dynastic people. What was this object? It looks like a flange of some kind, and note again that pieces are broken off. This damage appears to have happened in the very deep past, because a high percentage of these objects are broken, and they were supposedly found in a massive pile all together in an underground space. These are boomerangs that are on display. Is it possible that the dynastic Egyptians invented the boomerang, or could these objects have in fact come from Australia, where the more famous history of boomerangs we know of? And then this very strange object. It's apparently made out of very hard granite once again, and the tool marks that we see where these circles are appear to be machine marks. What it's used, or what it was used during dynastic times for, I don't know, but again, it seems to be an object that was inherited by the dynastic Egyptians. Notice the strange burn marks on it. The burn marks could very well have come from a cataclysm that occurred globally about 12,000 years ago. It not only affected sites in Egypt, but we see ample evidence in Peru, Bolivia, and other locations that have megalithic structures. And why is it that all of the large granite boxes appear to have significant damage, especially in the corners? And now, this other object on the first floor has obvious tube drill holes. Again, this is granite containing quartz crystal. In order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology. And now we're in what's called the Amarna section, which is where we find the collection of statues and other works of Akhenaten, who personally is my favorite of the pharaohs. Here he is portrayed as being androgynous, possibly. It is believed by some experts on Akhenaten that he physically did look different from the average human being, and he simply told his artisans, "Portray me as I am." That shows that he had a high level of personal confidence. And here we have a classic portrayal of the Aten sun god with Akhenaten with possibly an elongated head. And there's Nefertiti on the left. And here we have the famous busts of his daughters, including Meritaten, who obviously is shown with an elongated head. And here, another view. It's amazing that only about a year ago we were allowed to start taking photographs and filming inside this museum. Before that, it was illegal. But that's what's happening in Egypt. So please consider joining us in April 2019. So we're starting at the Temple of Hathor in Dendara, which is reasonably close to Luxor. And this is a dynastic construction. You can see the massive size of these columns. There are actually probably too many than are what are required. But the major fascinating thing here are what are called the Dendara light bulbs. Now, whether they actually are light bulbs or not is very much up in the air. You can decide for yourself. But they're located in a very small underground chamber, which takes special access to get into. And this is what they look like. There are actually, I believe, 8 of them. You can see they kind of look like a light bulb, but other people say that there's something else. Another term used is a Crookes tube, which is a very simple light instrument. And here's a little video showing you the detail. The lighting in here is quite terrible, but it's a secret little chamber, very narrow access, and these are very curious sculptures. Then outside we see what are called keystone cuts, and there are hundreds of them here. It's likely that there were originally either bronze or wooden clamps to hold these sandstone blocks together. Probably wood, because that would take a lot of bronze. And now we're in the Valley of the Kings, and these are phenomenal shaft systems that of course were used as tombs, but it's highly unlikely that the pharaonic people or the dynastic people constructed them, because they're hundreds of feet long. Here's a diagram of the burial place of Seti I, and you see the hundreds of feet that these go on in the bedrock in the Valley of the Kings. There's no way that this could have been done with hand tools. They're way too long. So you can see this is actually quite close to the entrance going back out. And as I walk further back, these things are perfectly bilaterally symmetrical and just phenomenal. And this is the nature of the stone of the area. So you can see that it naturally fractures. So the idea that these were cut out with hand tools is quite ridiculous. They were probably done using some kind of high technology long before the dynastic times. Now we're at the Ramesseum. This is what remains of a 1,000-ton granite statue. And this is the base that weighs 500 tons. Now the quarry for this is hundreds of kilometers away. And what's most curious are the weathering patterns on the granite, because this is not the way that granite naturally weathers. The surfaces are peeling off, and here you see all these crack marks. It's likely that this was a site hit by an ancient cataclysm 12,000 years ago. Now this is the dynastic aspect, these columns with the giant sculpture in the background. And this is one of the artifacts that I also believe was hit by this cataclysmic episode that was probably solar plasma from the sun. Here you can see that the crystal structure has expanded and the sculpture is basically falling apart. This is not simple vandalism. And here again you see the crystal structure has expanded. Geologists have told me this would be the result of very fast, very high heat, thousands of degrees Celsius. And this once was a granite stone too, but you see it's basically the surface is falling apart. And here again, the surface is sloughing off. And all the scorch marks, the discoloration, indicative of high heat. And the greatest example are the colossi of Memnon, especially this one on the left. The front surfaces are far more damaged than the sides or the back, so it appears that the solar pulse or plasma struck it from the east at sunrise. You see here the sides are not as badly damaged. Part of the arm has been ripped off of it. And you also notice the scorching marks of the heat. And again, the sides are relatively intact. And here's a short video of the magnificent colossi. They weigh 720 tons each. The one on the left is a single block of stone. The one on the right was actually badly repaired during Roman times. And as we start to walk around to the side of the sculpture, again, you see the front here, extremely badly damaged. That could not have been done simply with somebody trying to vandalize it. So this is a scale model of what Luxor originally looked like. I believe it had 11 obelisks originally. And here again we see the overall layout of dynastic Karnak. It's one of the largest archaeological sites in Egypt and in fact the world. And this is the dynastic aspect, as in sandstone column construction. What we're going to focus on, though, is the pre-dynastic, much more ancient works in harder stones. So there appears to have been a cataclysmic event that happened at Karnak and other locations about 12,000 years ago. And in the case of Karnak, the path of destruction seems to have been solar plasma that went right down this route that I'm walking. Interestingly, it's 23.5 degrees off east-west, so the planet might have been in a different axis at that time. And what we're looking at is major destruction to the hard stone surfaces, such as granite and basalt. This groove is a power saw mark of some kind, indicating lost ancient high technology in the past. And here we get to have another look at it. Perfectly even. And also these core drill holes that we find not only at Karnak, but also other sites such as Abu Sir. And you can see this core drill is massive in size, very industrial, very ancient. And then we also see the granite surfaces here have basically been burnt off. This is not destruction by some tribal people. This is some kind of cataclysmic solar plasma, according to the theory of people such as Dr. Robert Schoch. And here again we see another example of it. The upper part of that column was in good shape, but the lower section is basically burnt off. And here again you see the interior of what's called the Holy of Holies, and it too shows scorching, and the stone is basically peeling off the surface. Now in another location we have this incredible object made of calcite. It originally was one piece of stone. That's the absolute truth. It was originally one piece of stone. It's been badly repaired in more recent times, but no one has any idea where the quarry for this stone is located. It's likely not even from Egypt. And here we see the interior. Again, it's been heavily repaired, but originally it was one block of stone, which is incredible. And here you see the detail of the outside surfaces, and the fact that the corners, at least on the inside, are not sharp angles. They're actually curved. So some theories are that this was a resonant structure of some kind, and the reason for the curved surfaces in the corners was to allow sound or other vibration to move through the structure freely. Then as we move back into the core area, again we see ancient stone blocks with the surfaces basically burnt off. And this has been attested to by geologist Susan Moore, who will be speaking to you in this video shortly. But again, along this axis path, 23.5 degrees off of east-west, the surfaces are hugely damaged, such as here, once again. And it's only in this direct area that this damage has occurred. So looking up, you can see that the affected area is from the surface up about 50 feet. The obelisk surfaces above that are still intact, but the lower surfaces have been affected, especially the eastern side. Eastern side affected much more than the other surfaces, so the force came from the east. And again, more of the amazing ancient core drill holes. Many different theories as to why they were done, why they were made, but they are at least as good, if not better, than 21st century technology. So again, we see another surface from the bottom up, badly eroded from some kind of heat. Upper areas not affected. And then as we continue along the path, going outside, still moving along this 23.5 degrees off east-west axis, again, you see the surfaces of the stone are weathered beyond that of normal, typical weathering by heat, or sorry, by sun and rain, etc., but by some enormous force. So once again, this is not the normal way that granite, for example, erodes. And then we also have surfaces of calcite. So the enormous heat of this plasma strike affected the stones in different ways. Calcite, it broke it into several pieces, and you can see the surface there on the right has sloughed off, maybe because of crystal expansion inside. And then we also see two more of these curious ancient core drill holes. But why just take my opinion? Let's listen to geologist Susan Moore and Patricia Awian. Okay, we're here with geologist Susan Moore, and Susan is going to describe the phenomenon that happened to this stone, which is a granite-like stone, I believe.
These stones in this little area, they've been puzzlement to us for numerous years. We keep trying to figure out what went wrong with these, why they're like it. And if you look at the rock here, you can see that the inner portion of the rock is a coarser crystalline size, and the outer side seems to have a finer crystalline crust. This is a fairly wide crust, this is a narrower crust. We just don't know why it's doing this. We actually see the same thing in a pillar, a door pillar over here. And, unless we could analyze these things, we're probably never going to know. But what it looks like to me, and this is just sheer speculation, is that the inner portion of this has recrystallized, and as it cooled, the outer portion of it cooled down quicker and made this finer grain crust.
Okay, and that would likely be the result of intense heat.
Intense heat.
Okay, we've been coming here since the first time we started exploring this temple on our own, and the keepers would bring us in here and say, this is the real Holy of Holies. And the first thing we noticed is the destruction of this particular granite, or is it?
It's a diorite.
I'm sorry,
Diorite.
yeah. This particular rock, you can see its destruction, the destruction's from the inside out. And what is, what would cause something like that? So our theory was it was the energy of the site. But as we move in our research and our learning, we think about all the different possibilities. Yes, maybe the energy, that they're harnessing a magnetic current here, but is there another event from above that connects and hits this is attracted to this magnetic energy that causes this explosion? And as Susan would just explain, could create something like this that we can't create today with our own technology.
Now here we are on the Giza Plateau in Egypt, of course. And there you see the Great Pyramids in the background. That's what's called the second pyramid. Where we're going today is what is called the Osiris Shaft. And this has not been opened for decades, if not hundreds of years, to the general public, but thanks to the new Minister of Supreme Antiquities, it's open if you want to literally rent the space for 2 hours. Now, it's not open to the general public. It requires a special permission and fee, and that special permission or fee costs between $2,000 and $3,000 for a 2-hour period, but we decided to do that for our guests, and we will do this every year on our tour from now on. So this is our group lining up. The door has been unlocked, and so gradually we're going to start moving in. So this is the uppermost level, which is in the bedrock itself. And here comes Jason, who was in our group in March 2018, clearly thrilled at what he saw. And now we move in. Again, this is the surface level, which is in the bedrock itself. And now we look down to the second level. Now, I'm not going to tell you immediately how many levels there are. This is all part of the incredible experience of this space that has only been open since, I believe, November 2017. Now, this is down in the second level. You can see it's quite small. Nothing too incredible to look at in this space, except the fact that, again, it's cut in the bedrock. And this is giving you a view from the second level with the ladder up to where we first enter. So this is about 12 of us out of a total of 30, getting ready to go down into the next level. But of course, because of the nature of the space, only a certain number could go down at a time. But this is looking down into what is the next level of the Osiris shaft. Again, cut into the bedrock. This could not have been done with hand tools during the dynastic period, with bronze chisels, etc. So now we're down in the next level and looking up to the level above, which was the small room. You can see the ladder on the right is very rickety, but a newer one was installed, which is on the left-hand side, and it is quite a safe experience to go down. And now looking into this room, there are 6 niches, and in 2 of the niches are large stone boxes. You can see the tool marks here in the wall. The lighting isn't that great, so flashlights, of course, were required. And then, again, this is one of these stone boxes you can see on the left. Very mysterious. So this is moving into one of the niches. Again, 4 of them are empty. What has happened to the actual boxes, excuse me, if they were even in there, is unknown. But now we're going to focus on this, which is one of the boxes that has this very mysterious goo-like organic material on the surface and also inside. Next time we go in, I would like to actually take a sample in order to find out what that material is. It doesn't appear to simply be fire or smoke, because there's very little smoke on the ceiling. It seems as though something happened to whatever or whoever was inside the box, like an explosion of some kind. And then this is the other box, which is more roughly shaped, and inside, mysterious, massive damage, again, as if the interior of the box exploded. Very strange. This isn't simply tomb robbers going in and trying to extract material from the interior, there's some kind of chemical process went in here which is very weird. So again, looking up the ceiling, there are bits of splat, but not what I would call smoke or carbon material from a flame. Some other kind of strange phenomenon occurred here. And this box, supposedly the material is not granite, it's not basalt, it's not syenite, it's not diorite. It's a stone that is not found in Egypt. So weighing in at a minimum of 30 tons, where did this stone come from? How was it shaped? And how was it brought down the shaft system into this niche? Here again you can see the tool marks, very similar, almost scraping like tool marks. And then we're looking down into what will be the actual bottom level of the Osiris shaft. This is Yusuf Awiyan, who was one of our guides. The water that he's in is crystal clear, and he's standing on top of another giant box that's submerged underwater. So we are presently 200 feet minimum underground in the Osiris shaft. And there is underground water, of course, at Giza. But this water is crystal clear. So where exactly did it come from? And was it intended that this water be in there and be part of whatever process this structure originally performed? Because they call it a symbolic tomb, which is a really cheap way of saying we don't understand what this was made for, who made it, and when it was made. It's clearly megalithic, and thus it's likely at least 12,000 years old and was found by the dynastic Egyptians. They did not construct this, because this possibly could be beyond 21st century technology that was involved, which we see also at other places in ancient Egypt. The clear signs of lost ancient high technology that was present long before the time of the Pharaonic people. I believe the stone is called dacite. I might be wrong. That would be D-A-C-I-T-E. Interestingly, inside this niche is a recessed area where a human-sized sarcophagus could have once been. That could have been an actual dynastic burial, but the other two boxes and the ones submerged underwater were beyond the technological capability of the dynastic Egyptians, and thus has to be much, much older. So as far as I know, only a handful of groups have been in the Osiris shaft since its opening in November of 2017. You can rent the space if you want. Minimum cost is $2,000 US, but that is what we do on each of our yearly tours, usually in March or April. We do very special things for our guests. We get access to other places which are very, very difficult for the common traveler or tourist to get to see, but that's why we like to believe that our tours are very special. And that's why there is a definite focus, not so much on the dynastic people, though that is covered, but more on lost ancient high technology and trying to unravel who did this work, when this work was done, why it was done. And of course, you can learn more about this under tours on my website at hiddenincatours.com. So we did have a full 2 hours. Here's Yusuf climbing back out of the water again. And this was an amazing adventure because for many, many years I wanted to go inside this Osiris shaft, but of course it was always padlocked, and even requests with the authorities were met with deaf ears. They refused to even think about the idea of allowing anybody in there. But the new Antiquities Minister is very progressive. He understands that opening up more of these sacred ancient spaces brings more tourism, but what it also does is it allows us, the researchers, to try to unravel the secrets of ancient places, such as here on the Giza Plateau, as well as the other sites all the way from Tanis, which is in the Nile Delta area in the north, south to Aswan, where we find amazing things such as the unfinished 1,200-ton obelisk in the quarry at Aswan. So I hope you've enjoyed this adventure. We will definitely be going back to the Osiris Shaft in April of 2019 on our very special tour, limited to 42 participants. This is the famous step period of Djoser or Zoser, and this is likely the first time that the dynastic Egyptians tried to build a large pyramid. But what do you make of this shaft cut into the solid bedrock? It's one of many in this location at Saqqara, and it's likely a pre-dynastic construction made by the master builders, because we also find these on the area of Giza, as in where the Great Pyramids are located. So I'm not interested in the dynastic period, though it's a splendid history of ancient Egypt. What I'm looking for are examples of lost ancient high technology and catastrophic damage. So what we're seeing here are very hard stone surfaces that appear not to have been necessarily vandalized, but more likely were victims of a massive cataclysm of some kind. Now, some of these surfaces, you can see the weathering is very strange. It's like the stones were hit with a very high heat. Not simple vandalism, though of course the structures would have been utilized as quarries during the dynastic times and also well into the Roman times. But what has happened to this little pyramid? It's not simply people taking hammers and trying to break it up. It looks like it has been struck by high heat. And we'll see many other examples of this that tend to support Dr. Robert Schoch's theory that plasma was ejected from the sun and struck certain parts of the earth about 12,000 years ago. So when you look at the top layer of the soil, see it's orangey brownish looking. That's what happens to limestone when it's hit with very high heat. And here is another example. The top surface is there. And again, how was this little pyramid, which was immaculately constructed, how was it damaged so heavily like this? Again, my theory, and when we look at these burn marks that you see on the surface of the limestone, was that this pyramid and others were hit by solar plasma 12,000 years ago. And then later, they were found by the dynastic Egyptians somewhere around 5,000 years ago. So let's go inside the pyramid here, Pyramid of Unas. Unas was a pharaoh. He was quite possibly buried in this pyramid, but he and his people did not construct it. The walls in this case appear to be granite on the left and right sides, and the lid, or ceiling, and that granite would have been brought from at least 500 miles away from the quarries at Aswan. And here again, the walls appear to be granite. If this was used for strength, that is a possibility. However, it may have been used for energetic purposes, which is something I get into in other videos that I've done about Egypt. And now we're going to go into the back recess underground here at the Unas Pyramid and have a look at this really intriguing box that some people would say is a sarcophagus, but the stone is very fine, tight-grained granite, and again, the box would have had to have been transported from Aswan, which is more than 500 miles away. And it appears that the lid was supposed to hermetically seal the box. Now, for most of their time, the dynastic people only had Bronze Age level technology, so there's no way that they were able to shape this box with such finesse. So this Unas pyramid has been recently opened up for us to explore. We were there in March of 2018, and now we're going to climb back outside of it and explore more of the Saqqara area. So once again, the Djoser pyramid or Zoser pyramid, and this could be a construction done by the dynastic people, because you see it's relatively small stones that are stacked on top of each other. But I wonder where those staircases go. They appear to go underground somewhere. Maybe they connect with the ancient tunnel system, which is spoken of not only here, but also throughout the Giza Plateau area, which is immense. It's not just the area where you find the Great Pyramids, but it includes places like Saqqara, Abu Sir, Abu Rawash, etc. And now we look down, you see the top level is dynastic, but below that, cut into the bedrock. So again, the bedrock cutting is probably a pre-dynastic work. And here we have another look at that. You see, stacked stone on top of cutting into the bedrock itself. Now here we are at one of my favorite places at Saqqara, and this is called the Serapeum. Again, notice that the upper layer appears to be burnt or scorched by heat. And as we walk into the Serapeum, this is one of the most spectacular places by far in all of ancient Egypt because of the mysterious boxes we're going to look at. The site was discovered by the archaeologist Mariette, I believe in the 19th century, and had been relatively unknown for a long period before that. It is literally underground. The dynastic people probably found it, but the constructions you're going to see could not have been done by the dynastic people. The first thing is, if the lights weren't on, this place would be pitch black. And so how could they possibly have quarried out this huge tunnel system that goes through it? There's no appearance of any soot or anything like that on the ceiling. And so the construction of this tunnel system, which appears to have been repaired, as you can see on the left, in different periods of time, the lighting must have been artificial in some way. And though that sounds hard to believe, you will believe it when you see what these boxes look like. It appears in some ways that the Serapeum is a climate-controlled atmosphere, because every time I've been there, and it's been at least 6 times so far, it's always about 70 degrees Fahrenheit or approximately 20 degrees Celsius, which is a very pleasant temperature. It's not like something like the interior of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, which is very, very warm. So the coolness, of course, is because it's subterranean, but the question is, what are these immense objects that we're about to see? How were they created? What were they possibly used for? And why, when Mariette discovered them, were all of the lids except one pried open? Very mysterious place. So the lid of this box weighs 30 tons, and the box itself weighs 70 tons. So that's 100 tons, and you can see the highly polished surfaces with the really crappy hieroglyphics done. Conventional academics insist that the shaping of the box and the hieroglyphics are contemporary with one another, but that is completely ridiculous. It's quite obvious that the dynastic people found these boxes in situ, and in some cases decided to carve hieroglyphics in some of them. Again, the stone likely came either from the eastern desert or from Aswan. Also, these recesses you can see in the walls are larger than the length of the lid of the box. So that means that the indentations were likely made so that the tops, 30 tons apiece, could swivel open. And again, the surface is beautifully polished. The lid fits on so tightly that it would hermetically seal the box. There's no way a Bronze Age culture could have possibly done this work, though the hieroglyphics, of course, they very much could have done. They are very crude, and because of the granular nature of the granite with the quartz content, that's why the lines are not straight. And why are these indentation areas polished as well? It's very odd that the original builders didn't make them perfectly flat surfaces. If this was a resonant box of some kind for high technology or some other function, it could be that the indentations were for final tuning of the box, because the acoustics inside are absolutely astonishing, and the box loves the sound of the tone Om. So again, the hieroglyphics are so crude, whoever the artisan was, he could not even, or she, could not even make a straight line because of the granular nature and the content of very hard quartz, which is in the material itself. But the high polish of the surfaces is quite amazing. You would likely need to have something like diamond, dust, or powder to be able to produce a polished surface like that. And then as we turn, we're going to explore the fact that there are more than 20 of these massive boxes in situ in the Serapeum at Saqqara. Now, not only are they in the niches, but you can notice they're about 5 feet down into the niche. So the box would have to have been moved through the corridor, turned around a corner, and be gently placed downwards by about 6 feet or 2 meters into the niche itself. And again, intriguing that the interior walls are wider so that the top of the box could swivel freely. But how are you going to move a 30-ton lid by hand in such a narrow space? So we continue walking through the tunnel labyrinth system here at the Serapeum, and this little hallway connects up with the second long tunnel. It does not have niches in it, but it seems to be the way that the stone boxes were transported into the other tunnel system. And what we're going to see here is very much telltale as to what was going on in ancient Egypt before the time of the dynastic people. What we're coming up to is one of the giant boxes without the lid, and the surface is relatively rough, so it was shaped likely before it was brought into the tunnel system of the Serapeum. And this is like it's locked in time. Something happened at the Serapeum, stopping all work. Once again, there's no soot or anything like that on the ceilings, and so candles or torches or whatever would not have been used in the fabrication of the tunnels or the movements of the boxes themselves. So artificial lighting of some kind would have to have been used, and this goes along with the fact that these boxes had to have been made utilizing high levels of very advanced technology, in some cases technology beyond our capacity today. So as we walk past the unfinished box that likely would have been finished once it was very close to its niche, we see in the background the lid that was to accompany the box. So it's very likely, and it's telling us, that the box would have been moved first, then the lid second. The box would have probably then been put into its niche, then the lid, 30 tons, put on top of the box. But how was the polishing done to make such a beautiful seal? And then we have this other orphaned lid here, and we're going to go back into the main tunnel to see where its companion box might be located. So again, this is the main tunnel, and here you can see the flashlights glinting off a smaller box, but very finely crafted, with some crude hieroglyphics put on later. This is the companion box for that monstrous lid that we saw just previously. You can see it wasn't finally finished, so the finishing would have to have been done in the niche itself. And Saqqara is a massive, massive site, and so there are other underground structures that we visited. Not as impressive as the Serapeum, but still, if you're going to spend the entire day at Saqqara, then it's well worth to make efficient use of your time. So in the case of climbing into this little tunnel, which again appears to be lined with granite, then you literally have to get on your hands and knees and crawl. There's a lot of dust and ground up limestone on the floor, and so you'll definitely have to wash your clothes after this little adventure. But that's what visiting ancient Egypt, especially with us, is all about. It's seeing as much as possible and focusing on the most mysterious ancient constructions that could not have been achieved by the dynastic Egyptians, telling us that standard history is very short-sighted and that there are thousands of years of time in ancient Egypt that are not documented properly by standard academia. Now, this box appears to be made of limestone, which could have been achieved, possibly, by the dynastic people with their bronze tools. But what are the strange scorch marks that we see on the stone, just like we saw on the surface with the little pyramid of Unas? So where will the... Now, this is what is called the Valley Temple. That's its common name. And you can notice that it's limestone that is excessively weathered and eroded. The external surface has been removed over the course of time to be recycled for other structures, likely in the city of Cairo. But the amount of weathering involved is extremely interesting. And here's a section of the outer wall of granite that is still in situ. Now, geologists have told me that the amount of weathering on the limestone surfaces above is far more than one would expect from wind and rain and sand and sun over the course of, say, 2,000 years. Luckily, this section that you saw there of the outer granite core is still in place. But here you're looking at megalithic-sized stones, obviously. The granite outer facing was brought from, most likely, the Aswan Quarry, which is about 500 miles to the south, or 800 kilometers. And you're looking at serious tonnage here. And all of these stones interlock, or originally interlocked very beautifully without any mortar whatsoever involved. And again, here we are walking along, and this is what's called the Sphinx Temple in front of the Sphinx. And in fact, the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple were originally the same structure. And here again are some of the granite outer facing blocks that are still somewhat intact. There you see the Great Pyramid in the background. And again, you're looking at serious tonnage here in terms of the limestone core. Blocks weighing 10, 20, perhaps 40 tons. The weathering is extreme, and we believe that this structure is contemporary with the structure of the Sphinx, meaning that it is 12,000 plus years old, and this is based on what geologists, more than 200 from around the world, tell us, based upon the weathering patterns. So this is inside the so-called Valley Temple. Notice the amount of erosion on the bottom of this pillar as compared to higher up, which we will see in other video clips. You can see the bottom half, roughly, seems to be heavily weathered. That may very well have been water. And here you see the interfacing granite stones that originally were very tightly fitting together. Again, the granite all came most likely from the Aswan quarry in Aswan itself, in the very southern part of Egypt. Again, notice the weathering on the lower section. And here, again, we're still inside the Valley Temple. You see how the blocks interlock almost perfectly. There was no mortar originally, but they've done repair work, and so they've done some filling in recent times. And this is the passageway that takes us up higher onto the Giza Plateau. Again, megalithic-sized blocks of granite. And geologists have told us that the amount of weathering here is much more excessive than would be under normal conditions over the course of, say, 2,000 years. So once we're outside, there's the second pyramid on the left, and of course the Great Sphinx. And we're going to go into some detail as regards the weathering patterns on the Sphinx. But this is a walk back around the outside of the Valley Temple. Again, the exposed limestone surfaces, some of the external granite that was covering the outside and the inside. And another glimpse inside the niche of the Valley Temple so that we can see the scale of the granite blocks. There you see a repair that could have been done maybe in dynastic times. The floor is granite, and the walls are, again, these multi-ton blocks. So we go back outside and then turn to the left to have a look at the exterior of the Valley Temple that basically interlocks with what's called the Sphinx Temple. So they were originally one homogeneous structure. Now these massive limestone blocks were taken out of what's called the Sphinx enclosure. So whoever made the Sphinx cut out these multi-ton blocks in order to shape the Sphinx enclosure and shape the Sphinx itself. Each block was taken out, of course, individually and then locked into the one that had been taken out prior. And these vertical weathering lines are the indications of precipitation, and precipitation on such a scale has not been seen in this part of Egypt, geologists tell us, for at least 12,000 years. The head, of course, has been recarved during dynastic times, but you see the chest of the Sphinx heavily eroded, and there with the paws we see a lot of reconstruction that likely began during the time of Khufu. Now this shows the difference between the bedrock and here blocks in between the front paws of the Sphinx. And then this wooden walkway which is in between the front paws. And again, a lot of reconstruction has been done to the Sphinx over the course of possibly 4,500 years. You can see relatively modern rebuilding and then much older. And then the bedrock itself But you see that this is one of the back paws, and it clearly has been reconstructed in relatively recent times as compared to the weathering of the Sphinx enclosure. Again, major emphasis on the vertical weathering, because that indicates precipitation. And if you didn't know, there is an entrance near the very back end of the Sphinx. There is a ladder inside, so there could be a labyrinth of shafts and tunnels under the Sphinx and the entire Giza Plateau. Once again, the vertical water weathering and the excessive and extreme erosion that we find at the Sphinx. Different layers are different hardnesses, so the softer layers were carved out much more rapidly than the harder layers. You see the undulating lines. And this shows you the extent of the Sphinx enclosure itself, that the Sphinx was carved out of the bedrock itself. And there are the blocks taken from the Sphinx enclosure to build the Sphinx and Valley temples. So once again, on the left, you see that's bedrock. On the right, those are blocks. So the story that there is an entrance to the Sphinx in the front is likely true, because if you look at the rectangular system of boards there, that section can actually be taken out. And so it's believed that the Egyptologists have discovered the underground tunnel and shaft systems that exist under the Sphinx itself, extending likely all the way at least to the Great Pyramid, if not beyond. On the left you saw that bit of repair and this strange channel, which is really quite rough, but I never noticed this on previous trips. There's a channel that basically goes all the way around the Sphinx. Whether it was done during dynastic times or not is unknown. It's not very sophisticated. But just to emphasize one more time, the vertical weathering was precipitation. And it has not rained much around the Giza Plateau. Climatologists also tell us for at least 10, if not 12,000 plus years, making the Sphinx at least twice as old as the dynastic Egyptians. And there again is the entrance to a shaft with a metal ladder inside. Of course, it's illegal to go in there, but I filmed it so you could see. And more or less finally, once again, the extreme weathering marks on the limestone of the bedrock of the Sphinx enclosure. All of the repair work that's been done over the Sphinx over the course of up to 4,500 years. Some Egyptologists insist that Khufu was the one who constructed the Sphinx, but it's likely he and Khafre were the ones who did repairs. And this shows you again the transition between the bedrock and then these blocks of limestone and the rectangular section, which underneath is believed to be the entrance to the shaft and tunnel systems. Now this strange location is called Tanis, and it's in the Nile Delta in northern Egypt. It takes 3.5 hours to drive from Cairo, and for the last 2 hours we drive through lush vegetation and agricultural farmland. So the question is, why is Tanis seemingly devoid of life, and why is every sculpture and obelisk and pillar, etc., smashed to pieces? This is way beyond the damage of any marauding army or vandalism. This is cataclysmic destruction, and we're going to see lots of evidence of heat scorching on the surfaces of a lot of the stone. Now most of the stone, which is located at Tanis, such as this, is granite, and it's likely that the granite came from the great quarry at Aswan, and Aswan is 1,000 kilometers to the south. So how was all of this transported? These are small pieces. Again, notice the very strange erosion of the surfaces. And the only piece that seems to have been intact is this quartzite box. The hieroglyphics were likely done by the dynastic Egyptians, but it's clear that the dynastic Egyptians found the site of Tanis in complete destruction, and so they decided to build there and recycle with what they found. Now again, is this erosion natural or normal, or could it be the result of intense blasts of heat? This gives you the visual. Again, you can see that Tanis is more or less devoid of life except for the odd thorny bush like the one you can see on the right here. And when you walk on the surface, it's not like you're walking in sand or on dirt, but more like flour, as if all of the nutrients was burnt out of the soil itself. And this gives you an idea of the sheer volume of stone found at Tanis. Again, likely from the Aswan granite quarry, 1,000 kilometers to the south. And as you can see, every single stone shows incredible levels of damage. Archaeologists tried to put this sculpture together, but it does look like some of the extensions of it, like the arms, were literally blown off. This fits in well with the theory of Dr. Robert Schoch regarding solar plasma striking the Earth 12,000 years ago. And this is another example. You can see that the right-hand side of that statue has been hit with at least 2,000 degrees Celsius of heat. Now, all of this stone was found by archaeologists in the 19th century underground. They had to dig down 10 to 20 feet in order to find Tanis. And here you can see that this wall section, in fact, was probably rebuilt by the dynastic Egyptians, possibly 2 or 3 or 4,000 years ago. And look at that slab of granite on the left where Irene is standing, massive. So this area may have been exposed during dynastic times, and they built that wall section. There are also an incredible number of obelisks and sections of obelisks located in Tanis, more than at any other location by far in Egypt. This would not have been a place where obelisks were manufactured because, again, the quarry is 1,000 kilometers away. So they would have been made at Aswan and then transported to different locations around Egypt. But also what we know is that the obelisks themselves are megalithic, and they were constructed in pre-dynastic times by a civilization that clearly had lost ancient high technology, because the Bronze Age dynastic people could not shape granite surfaces like this. They could etch in hieroglyphics, but they couldn't shape sculptures like this. Now here again, the bottom of the statue, we're seeing intense heat. This has been corroborated by geologists that we've had on location. And again, it looks like sections of that statue were blown off, not struck off. Here's another statue. You see the left-hand side has been melted. These sculptors would have made sure that the stone was very consistent and homogeneous before they started the sculpture, so it's not a flaw in the stone, it's a heat effect that happened to the stone in the very distant past. Again, a massive block of stone, at least 20 tons. Surface erosion is excessive, and just everything is broken on a massive scale. Vandals with hammers could not do this kind of damage. This had to have been done by some sort of natural external force that literally blew Tanis to pieces. And we also see evidence of this at other locations such as Karnak and the Ramesseum and other locations to the south. But it's here. Look, another obelisk section on the left. And the fineness and depth of this carving, again, appears to be machined, not done by hand. So we're looking at the possibility that even hieroglyphics are older than the dynastic Egyptians. When you look into the background, that is the original level that archaeologists found in this area. So they had to dig down in order to expose all of the stone. Again, look at the blackness on that stone on the right. That appears to be heat. So this is an overview of Tanis, or at least this is what we were allowed to see. It's in the middle of an army/police base, and we were only allowed to see a certain section of it. If I started to wander off and look at other areas, I was immediately told to come back. And so why they're being so secretive here is a very good question. Again, devastating damage. The stone is strewn all over the place. This is not a civilization moving in and taking over and deciding to destroy ancient structures. There's another obelisk you see in the background with Yusuf Awiyan, another obelisk section, and then another obelisk section. There are between 10 and 20, if not more, obelisks that were found in the area, all broken. And again, this surface appears to be machined, not done with chisels. So that is lost ancient high technology evidence. Another section of an obelisk with very deep carving into the granite surface. And of course the stone has been lined up during the excavation times by the archaeologists. Here you see more sections of obelisks, and the new prevailing theory is that the obelisks were originally made not as standing monuments for the glorification of the ancient Egyptian rulers, but in fact they were part of an energetic system. They were the receivers of energy emitted from the power plants or energy structures that we call the pyramids, located around the Giza Plateau area. There's a perfect circular hole that could have been machined. And then we get to the tomb area. And if you look carefully, you can see that all of this stone was restacked during dynastic times. The giant blocks of granite were likely there originally. Then the dynastic people simply took stone from the area, especially this limestone on the left, and piled it up to create a tomb. Inside this one, we find a granite box. This likely was a sarcophagus. The roughness of the surface shows that it was probably done during dynastic times, because it's not that well done as compared to the finer craftsmanship of the older megalithic work. And then when we look up, we'll see that this top block has hieroglyphics on it. So clearly that was recycled from an older structure. The dynastic Egyptians did not move any material in terms of stone into the area. They simply recycled what they found. And their technical prowess was not much compared to that of the earlier lost ancient high technology civilization. Here again, we see a much larger box, which they would call a sarcophagus, with the top snapped off as if it was hit with an enormous force. And one last wander through the area of Tanis we were allowed to see, which was quite extensive. And again, you can tell this area was probably exposed and opened during dynastic times, and the stone was reconstructed, or the wall was reconstructed by the dynastic people. See the very poor work on the left-hand side. That's an addition during dynastic times. And the simple fact that this whole area here is devoid of life except for a handful of prickly bushes gives us a strong indication that solar plasma struck this area about 12,000 years ago. This is corroborated by Dr. Robert Schoch, who's a geologist, and also accounted in my book, Aftershock. Here again, we see more melted surface on this piece of quartzite. It is like a giant came in and just knocked everything to pieces. But it wasn't a giant, it was a giant force that came from outside of the Earth, plasma ejection from the sun, most likely striking at sunrise around 12,000 years ago. It could have been a series of events, not just one simple one-day event, but it could have taken place over the course of up to 300 years, according to Dr. Robert Schoch, that would have vaporized anything and anyone that was in this area. The soil might have been blown up into the sky and then came down and covered the whole site, because here I am on the original surface level. This is the surface that the archaeologists found, and in order to see the artifacts, you have to climb down, again, between 10 and 20 feet. And these mysterious men in black were with us. There were 4 or 5 of them. Very nice suits, sunglasses, automatic weapon hiding underneath his jacket. They were keeping a very fine eye on our activity, but thankfully we were able to film. Buenos días. Peru. Gracias. Once more at Puma Punku on the Altiplano of Bolivia. And I'm standing right next to the famous H blocks, which you'll now see. And these are what I call the maker's marks. You see the double lintel, and then the single lintel. This repeats over and over again. And here, and there. But with this one, those marks are missing. So you see the precision of the angles here, surface here, here, but this one was never completed. See the rounded corners. This surface almost complete, this one not. This one complete. The red sandstone quarry, where these massive blocks came from, is 9 miles in that direction.
Archaeology is very expensive. Very, very expensive.
Yeah, and our governments don't spend much money on culture.
They should spend more money in culture than on other things.
Right.
But I think it's not the time to prepare yet. Something different. We gotta do. I hope
person will see when they're looking.
So the surfaces and the magnetism seem to have some relationship. Other people have measured the fact that the gray stone seems to have magnetite in it, but it's not, the magnetism isn't constant or isn't continuous, as in the way it would have been laid down as a volcanic stone. There seems to be a relationship between the surfaces and the angles and the magnetism, which is very mysterious.
I often wondered if all that thing where they talk about the pyramid being a bit power plant and whatnot,
Yeah.
if you could go, okay, power plant has some kind of error and an explosion, but those power plants are sort of tied in globally.
Mm-hmm.
So one goes off and then sets the others off in this worldwide cataclysm or whatever and causes all this destruction. Maybe.
Yep, I think so. That's why I wrote my book, Aftershock, about it. So the site has been used as a quarry probably for about 1,000 years, ever since the decline or demise of the Tiwanaku culture. It's also obvious that the Tiwanaku people arrived here about 2,000 years ago and recycled some of the stone to create their own buildings. They didn't obviously shape this stone. This was done with lost ancient high technology, very advanced. In fact, probably more advanced than what we have today, which is the great mystery. What culture, more than 2,000 years ago, could have done this kind of work? Because the Tiwanaku had bronze tools. They couldn't have done it. The stone is very hard. The quarry for the red sandstone, again, 9 miles that way. The quarry for the gray andesite, 45 miles that way. Multi-ton blocks. More than 100 tons here. Over in Tiwanaku, 20, 30, 40 tons. That's what makes Puma Punku one of the most mysterious places on Earth, and why I keep coming back. The stones were not found where they presently are. Typical of archaeology, they excavate, they find, and then they line them up. And by doing so, they destroy what the original complex would have looked like. And therefore, there's no way to put Puma Punku back together again. And these massive foundation blocks, they could be in their original position, but one of them there, you can see it's still partially buried in the ground. So what cataclysm would have caused all of this original destruction prior to it becoming a quarry for the Spanish in the 1600s, all the way up until the 20th century.
So I believe before the Great Flood here that the world is interconnected as we almost see today.
Look at the size of these massive blocks.
Okay. Where we go?
We're going to see how is the pyramid, that pyramid. Let's do it.
As you can see, the excavation here only goes down about 2 feet, maybe 3 feet. But what is underneath it? Why don't the archaeologists dig deeper? Author Antonio Portugal came here in the 1990s with ground-penetrating radar, and they found that there are chambers underneath the surface of Puma Punku. But the archaeologists refuse to admit that, and the government will not allow there to be any more digging deeper. Why? Because they're trying to protect their story of the history of Puma Punku when in fact the history is much older and much more complicated than what we've been led to believe. Unfortunately, you can't see, but the Puma Punku complex is off north, south, east, and west by, it looks like something like 17 degrees, which is odd. Even relatively primitive cultures know how to align almost perfectly to north, south, east, and west. So the fact that the so-called pyramid of Puma Punku is off by 18 degrees and possibly more is curious. Could mean that it was built prior to the cataclysm of 12,000 years ago, and then the alteration in the axis of the earth would have caused the site to twist like this to its present off north, south, east, west condition. Here we have stone protruding out from the excavation. And what's also curious is here, because this top layer of stone is the andesite, which reacts to the Tesla meter, and the lower levels are the red sandstone that do not react to the Tesla meter. So that to me would tend to indicate that this band of gray andesite stone that used to go all the way around the perimeter of this pyramidal structure could have been an energetic layer. It could have made the energy inside different from that on the outside. This whole area was also only recently excavated. So, say 30 years ago, the soil level went all the way to here, bearing it. How many thousands of years would it take for the soil to build up to that level? Or was the site hit by a massive wall of mud from Lake Titicaca, which is only 8 miles away, during a cataclysmic period several thousand years ago? Also, these stones were cut with great precision. There is no clay or mortar or concrete or cement or anything in between the joints. They still, after thousands of years, fit quite well together. So, function of the staircase, why is it here? Because 12,000 years ago, the water level of Lake Titicaca would have been right here. This would have been the shore of Lake Titicaca. It's a rise of about 100 feet from the plains in the background, and that has been proven by geologists and other scientists. Because 12,000 years ago, Lake Titicaca was 10 times the size it is now. So now we're in the village of Tiwanaku, and this stone is taken from Puma Punku and Tiwanaku to build the foundations of houses, likely starting in the 16th century by the Spanish, as well as this archway. And the entire Iglesia de Tiwanaku, or the Tiwanaku Church, was all basically recycled material from Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. So it's not a unique situation because, of course, in Egypt you had the Greeks arriving, possibly destroying parts of the ancient Egyptian structures, and then the Romans came, and then the Muslims came and built their buildings out of the material that they found there. So we don't really know how much of Puma Punku was actually moved in order to build constructions here, but there's plenty of evidence that much of the foundation of the little town of Tiwanaku was constructed from the material of Puma Punku and Tiwanaku. And as a special treat, we're going to see what some people in this little town of Tiwanaku found when they were digging foundations for their homes.
Oh. 50 years ago, the owners of this house tried to build a new house, and they decided to make holes inside to put their houses up. And you know what did they find under this beautiful monolithic? And we keep it here because it's better than the museum. The people from this side are taking care better from this monolith than the museum. Please get closer to that.
In every courtyard in this little town, there are likely ancient stones from Puma Punku, either used as foundation blocks, or in this case, the entire statue was found buried underground. This is Tiwanaku in Bolivia.
Welcome to my friends from the United States and from Australia. Welcome to Tiwanaku. We got a new site, a modern one. I want to explain to you about this pyramid, which one is called Acapana. The size of this pyramid is 134 by 128 meters long and wide. It measures 20 meters up and got 7 terraces. The upper part is very interesting. It used to have a lake, a small lake where our masters from the past used to just watch the lake to see the stars. Since long time ago, we're trying to rebuild all this pyramid, but it will take maybe 50 more years until we got it finished. When we get in the top, I will show you a tunnel and what that means of that tunnel. So we're going to keep going to the top of the pyramid.
Okay, we're on top of the Acapana pyramid, and there you see excavation. And what we're going to actually see is that the archaeologists removed somewhere between 6 and 10 feet of clay soil to reveal the stone structure underneath. Conventional archaeology says that this structure is 1,000 to maybe 1,500 years old, but there's no way that by natural deposition you would get 6 to 10 feet of clay soil deposit in that time period. It's more likely that this was a victim of an ancient catastrophic event of a wall of water and mud coming from Lake Titicaca and burying the structure many, many thousands, possibly 12,000 years ago. So again, you can see the amount of material, as in soil, that was removed.
This work wasn't too long ago. No, was buried for so many years. Now we can tell how big it is.
So two almost identical stones, but the surface of this one is fresh and this one eroded. So the one on the right was lying face up, exposed to the weather for thousands of years. The one on the left was lying face down, and that's what protected this beautifully flat surface. What's intriguing is that the Chicana shape here is unfinished. So some tool of some kind, almost like sandblasting, went in and cut out the Chicana shape, but it was never finished. The surface was, but these should be very crisp 90-degree angles. So this is an unfinished example here at Tiwanaku and shows us that likely advanced technology would have been used to shape it. So what caused this stone to snap in half? Likely not the Spanish, more probably a cataclysm. Oh, here it is. 37% copper.
Interesting.
How much?
37%. And here we have the bearded god, or ancient teacher, called Wiracocha. And this is called the subterranean temple, for obvious reasons. But its initial construction may have been for something more pragmatic, like water catchment, for example, since rain here on the Altiplano at 13,000 feet tends to be sporadic. Final destination is the Gate of the Sun, or Puerta del Sol, the most famous thing at Tiwanaku, but not the only one that as you could clearly have seen in all the video prior to this. Again, we go from primitive Inca to Inca rebuilding to megalithic. Then the transition back to Inca again. So polygonal shapes. Here you go from classic Inca. And then here the Inca found a damaged superior wall that had been broken, so they simply took the stone and packed it back in, and then the original is here.
These ones are more, you know, at an angle. The edges are in.
And the other giveaway is, again, you notice that all the stone is of an equal, like it all came from the same quarries, from a green limestone, a green granite quarry. When you look up here, then you have smaller basalt blocks. So this is probably an example of the Inca trying to aesthetically make the wall look as good as that. But they couldn't do it, and they weren't able to go to the quarry, which is up on top of the mountain there, and cut blocks, big blocks like this up. So they simply scavenged from another building and then filled it in. And here again, you see the upper stuff is different. You go from granite to basalt. You go from large to small. And also the way that you see the way the wall is way off, how it bulges, right there. That's probably again a massive earthquake that came threw all of this material down and then shifted it. But it fits together so well, the wall didn't fall down, but it had to reestablish itself.
Look at this little rock here in between. Why they put it like this square?
Are going to show this kind of finest architecture, which is well tied each other, no, it's interlocked, no, joined, very well joined. That tells the differences between big rocks, boulders, and the type of material is green granite. But the stone over there, those are limestone, green granite, and we are gonna see darker granite later, and at Machu Picchu, white granite, different materials. So these Incas, they make sure to use solid and harder type of rocks because the construction should last almost forever, but at least for many generations.
Yeah, I saw where he was.
Right up above.
It goes down. Or maybe it's my vantage.
So here again, if you look at the workmanship, you can see the front looks really good, but then it splays as it goes out.
Yeah.
So that's the Inca trying to make this look like that. And if the wall hadn't been destroyed, you couldn't tell. It's like, oh, that's the same as us. But also these are the Inca tool marks. That's like a hammer doing the finishing work after 500 years, whereas that doesn't. Those don't have tool marks. So when the Spanish got here, they stucco coated the entire surface of everything. And in 1950 there was an earthquake and the church fell down, revealing the stone for the first time in 500 years. So the mayor of Cusco told the head of the church that if you want to rebuild your church, you have to clean all of these circles, and that exposed this for the first time. So this is the most finely done stone area in all of America. Nothing compared. This is the finest example of craftsmanship. But one of the weird things is you notice that the roof line goes in towards the inside of the building, which doesn't make any sense. So it's quite possible that this never actually had a roof.
Observen que tenemos acá. A ver, una pieza minúscula. Es una pieza minúscula, así como hay edificación megalithic.
So we had a group of dowsers here, like people who were really good at it. Every time they crossed one of these lines, the rods moved in. And then every time they walked past it, the rods moved back out. Huh. So they also measured that this is the center of the energy. So the energy is still working. It's actually pulsing in and out of the center because Cusco is the center of the Inca world. The Coricancha is the center of Cusco, and this is the center of the Coricancha. So it's an energetic thing that the Inca actually understood because they divided the sectors of their world up into along these lines called seques, which we'll see there's a drawing of what that was. So I think they were able to sense that this was energetic in some, like spiritually energetic or something. Yeah, yeah. But I think in original times it was some kind of facility. Yeah, like a practical facility. So you follow this line, and it goes around the corner, and then around the corner, and then around the corner, all the way to there. So that's a three-dimensional piece. locking into the rest of it.
So this is basically, this is a map of the Cusco area. So you see the center is the center is Cusco. The center of Cusco is the Coricancha. The center of the Coricancha is where that tub was that we saw. So compared to most cultures that will have borders between one country and another country based on a river or mountain range or something, this is based on energy lines. So that's why the Inca world is called the Tahuantinsuyu, which means the four quarters of the world. So the Inca world was divided into these four quarters, and these Seke lines radiate out from them. So it's just something that's kind of different.
And each black spot is like they have one waka, like ancient stones or sacred stones. That's the way they will know how to get to this. We should bring you. Well, to me that looks like they set this there and then stored it.
So in 500 years, with no evolution of tool technology, you do not go from this to that. It tells you.
What's interesting is that we've been talking about those knobs all day.
Yeah.
And they're up there, a few here and up there, but the rest of it they're without.
Yeah. So then again, it's pretty obvious here that you have the original wall here, and then part of it fell down, probably during the cataclysm. So the Inca took the stone, put it into place, used clay as mortar to put it together, ran out of material, and then got the local limestone or andesite and built on top. And then you have Spanish on top of that. This is our first site, and it is called Kenko. Kenko is an Inca term which means zigzag because there is a zigzag carving in the surface. It's a massive outcrop of limestone, which means that it was originally part of the ancient ocean. And as you can see, there are many cut surfaces all over it. Now, some archaeologists believe that it was a quarry of some kind, but there's no regular pattern. So how they can come up with a term like that, quarry, is unknown. To be honest, nobody knows how old these cut surfaces are, and nobody knows also who did the work, because the Inca had bronze tools, so they could possibly have done some of this work, but the weathering indicates that the surfaces are thousands of years older than the Inca culture, and therefore we don't know, in fact, who made this work. It is quite possible that it's much, much older than the Inca, and that the Inca found this site as well as the nearby city of Cusco in ruins. They adopted Cusco and sites like this and turned them into what are called huacas, which means sacred site. It could very well be that they decided that this and others were sacred sites because of all of the complex stone carving that had been done a long, long time ago. Now, Kenko is quite close to another famous site called Sacsayhuaman, and that is in fact what we have here. This is Sacsayhuaman. And people, the term itself is actually a corruption by the Spanish. The original name could very well have been Sacsayhuma or Sacsayhuma, which could mean the place where the heart and the head unite or join, meaning that it again was a very important religious space. Or it could mean the head of the puma, because the city of Cusco was formed in the shape of a giant puma. Now, it again is a megalithic work, much of it predating the Inca time. You can see the zigzag wall in the background, which is incredibly massive. Some of the stones there weigh as much as 120 tons, were brought from a quarry some 3 miles away, and there is no way that the Inca themselves could have moved, shaped, and put into place these stones. They even told the Spanish when they arrived that this was not their construction, that this was there when they got there. So Sacsayhuaman, one of the largest megalithic sites on the planet, as viewed by my quadcopter called Pachacutec, which I used to take all of this video. And here, a final view of Sacsayhuaman, or Sacsayhuma, with the city of Cusco in the background. Then we move to another nearby site, part of the Sacsayhuaman complex, called Amaru Machai, which means the cave of the serpent. It again is a massive outcrop of limestone that has been shaped, not just the outcrop itself, but many, many other stone surfaces in the area. It covers hundreds of hectares or several hundred acres. A massive complex, heavily eroded, and much, much older than the Inca culture. This is just a small example of one of the cut surfaces here. There are estimated to be thousands of them in the area. And here we go with another flyby. The road you see in the background is in fact the Inca Trail, and that trail still goes from the city of Cusco south to the middle of Chile and Argentina. And here we send quadcopter Pachacutec up so you can see some of the surfaces. Here is the side of the outcrop where the two caves are. There actually are two caves. One is the cave of the moon, and the other the cave of the sun. And those are Inca constructions in the foreground, but the actual stone carving of these surfaces here is likely much, much older than the Inca. We now move into the Sacred Valley of Peru to a very small ancient site called Chikong, which is in a side valley. And it's not that intriguing a site, but you can see there is some polygonal work here, and then also mud brick, and then rough work. It could have been an ancient ritual place. And also in the Sacred Valley, we have this little place which is called Waka Amaru, which means the sacred place of the serpent or the snake. Very few tourists ever see this place. Not super significant historically, and has some very rough construction as well as the quite beautifully carved snake symbol. This is an Inca construction that you're looking at there. It's likely that all of the work here was done by the Inca, whereas some of the more major sites we find much older megalithic work, and then the adoption or inheritance by the Inca, and then their own constructions as well. And here, our next location, which is Calca. Calca is also in the Sacred Valley of Peru, and this is a massive Inca work or construction of terracing. Truly astonishing. It's not known if this was originally a natural hill that the Inca then altered, or whether they built it from the valley floor and created these massive terraces which are 10 to 12 feet high. The total land surface here is very immense, and they could have grown many, many different crops and great abundance. The Sacred Valley, the climate basically is springtime year-round, and therefore you can grow food here 12 months of the year, more or less. So again, a magnificent work by the Inca culture. And also, terraces of this scale tend to be royal Inca, meaning that the produce that was made here was for the consumption of the royal Inca family themselves. The Inca civilization was led by a royal family of people. Not everyone who lived in the Inca world was called an Inca. It was the 1,000 or fewer people who had the royal bloodline that were designated as actual Inca people. Sacred Valley is more than 100 kilometers or 60 miles in length and produces an astonishing amount of food to this very day. And now we're at one of the truly megalithic places. This is Ollantaytambo. All of these are terraces that were constructed during the Inca times, but we find much older megalithic works here as well. Really astonishing constructions, which you can start to see, or you could see on the right. But as we go across and see the Inca work here, huge terracing system, very large terraces, so for the royal Inca family themselves, more or less. And this was one of the last refuges for the Inca people when the Spanish conquered Cusco and the Inca world. So as we start to go up here, up through these Inca terraces, we'll find that there are megalithic works actually on top, which is quite curious, because quite often the megalithic older work is on the bottom, but you see the difference in the construction technique on the right and here. You see the big polygonal works with the town of Ollantaytambo in the background. And then here, the actual megalithic works. As the quadcopter zooms down, you see these 6 huge blocks of granite. as we come in from the side view here, again, you see a crude Inca wall in the foreground. And then on the left, stones weighing 60 plus tons that were quarried from a mountain in the distance. Definitely pre-Inca work. And once again, we zoom in. If you traveled down through the Sacred Valley this way to the north, you would reach the famous Machu Picchu. But again, the comparison between the megalithic construction and the cruder and later Inca work. And another view, you see the size of these massive blocks. And it looks like they were destroyed by some kind of cataclysm. Next, we are now south of Cusco at Inti Punku. Inti is sun and Punku is gate, so the gate of the sun. This again is a combination construction. Part of it was done by the Inca and part of it is older megalithic. And the difference will be quite obvious as we turn the quadcopter around and then start heading past. You'll notice the large megalithic blocks on the left-hand side, and on top of that, the Inca built their works. 1 hour's drive in this direction is the ancient city of Cusco. Now here, we have an above view. You see that channel? That is a water channel created by the Inca. And a quicker zooming in shot, again you see the difference between the Inca work on the left and the megalithic in the foreground with Inca work on top of it. And here again a view of the water channel and the Inca work, and then the megalithic work below, the foundation of the later Inca construction. And one final view, I believe, or maybe one of two final ones. Again, showing you the channel. And a zoom back to show you what is left of the entire complex. These gates were actually the official entrances into the sacred city of Cusco during Inca times. Our next location, not visited too often, is called Kiarumiok, which means the stones of the moon. Again, it's quite likely that some of this work was done before Inca times, though the majority is Inca. You see the interesting shape of a semicircle, which some people, such as engineer Arlen Andrews, believe is a solar clock of some kind. It's the only one of its kind in the entire area. Here again, a better view of the so-called solar clock, carved into a harder stone. I believe this is andesite and not limestone. And here a view from above. You see, it's almost a perfectly shaped semicircle, and shadows are cast by the sun, so it could, in fact, have been some kind of solar clock. And flying over one more time, you see the uniqueness of that semicircular shape. It does basically face east, which makes sense in terms of being a solar clock. And then we come down to give you a view of the faceting aspects on it. Again, not many tourists visit this place. It is in fact quite a large site, and we're going to now explore some of the Inca work located above where the semicircled solar clock is located. Polygonal work, likely Inca, and then a sunken courtyard of some kind, and viewing part of this site. It's actually quite massive. It's larger than this. It goes up to the top of the nearby mountains. But we were too lazy to go and see all of it. However, this gives you an idea that there's far more to ancient Peru and Cusco than just Machu Picchu. We're now moving to the coast of Peru, and this location is near the town of Paracas. It's called Chongos. It's a cemetery, very ancient cemetery with small pyramid-like structures. The cemetery was in use from likely 500 BC until the fall of the Inca at around 1500 AD. So it was used by ancient people for at least 2,000 years. See, basically no plant life can exist here whatsoever. It's one of the most extreme desert areas on the planet, the northern extension of the Atacama Desert in Chile. But where there is water, there is life. So there is underground water that travels from the Andes in the area of the highlands of Peru around Cusco, and these underground streams are accessed so as to be able to have water for the agriculture. But anything higher than the water table, like this pyramidal structure, can't even grow a cactus. Zooming back and having a look again at the pyramidal structure, of which there are many in the area. Our next location is Palpa, which is near Nazca in Peru, south of Paracas. And again, this is the northern extension of the Atacama Desert, where there's no water, there is no life whatsoever. And this is where we find hundreds, if not more than 1,000, geoglyphs. The Nazca ones are famous, the Palpa ones are not very famous, but equally as significant. Here the quadcopter is slowly approaching some. There are, as I said, about 1,000 in the area, and you can see they're quite whimsical characters made by the Paracas people. And our next location is Nazca itself. And these are the Puquio wells that most people or visitors never see. Again, they capture the water that is traveling underground, and they are spirals, almost like a staircase, so as to be able to access the fresh water. There was once a huge system of these Puquio wells. Now there are possibly 15 or 20 that have been repaired, but they would have been in many locations in the Nazca area. Again, access points for water, and also the importance of the underground streams, because there's no surface water and no rain, or maybe an inch of rain per year in the area, that they were vital for the survival of the people. It could be that these were made by the Nazca, but they could have also been made by the Paracas, who existed before Nazca times. And now we're near Lake Titicaca, and this is called Amaru Muru. It's an outcropping of red sandstone, so it's high in iron oxide content, and people believe that it's an energetic place, a place of communing with higher levels of consciousness possibly, but no one knows actually who made it. The Spanish, of course, called it the Devil's Doorway, but it's believed by some mystic people that you can communicate again with other energies, you can possibly communicate with other ancient sacred sites utilizing this portal. Some archaeologists claim that the Inca constructed this, but it's the only one of its kind. So no one, even the local people, knows who originally did the construction work here. And it's only about a mile physically from Lake Titicaca. 12,000 years ago, Lake Titicaca was about 100 feet higher in lake level than it is now. So the water would have been lapping, or the shore would have been lapping right where this man is standing. You see he's taking the position of one of those wishing to use this as a communication device. So this large outcrop is quite unique to the area. And again, nearby is Lake Titicaca. So Amaru Muru. Still at Lake Titicaca, this is Huaca Amaru, that almost nobody outside the local area has ever seen. The official name is Santiago de Oje, which is a Spanish term, and since the Spanish did not construct it, I refuse to call it that. So Huaca Serpiente or Huaca Amaru is what the place should be named. No one knows for sure what culture constructed it. It appears as if it was buried, possibly by some kind of cataclysm. Some of the stone was removed to build local houses, but the local people estimate that it is approximately 2,000 years old, or at least 1,000 years old. It was a temple dedicated to some kind of serpent deity and was only excavated about 5 years ago. So very little is known about it, very little archaeological work has been done to it, and there could be other significant sites, and in fact there are in the area, including an underwater pier and possibly some underwater constructions. So here the quadcopter is coming down on the main site that has been excavated, and then goes back up again, so you can get a picture of the actual small excavation. And now Tiwanaku, one of the mega sites located in Bolivia, the most famous of all of Bolivia's ancient sites, thought by conventional archaeology to have been constructed by the so-called Tiwanaku civilization from 100 AD to about 900 AD, but it in fact has some megalithic elements, and so therefore could be far, far older. It's also been very badly damaged, and these walls, for example, were completely reconstructed. Only the standing stones are original. All of the fill work was done by archaeologists in the 1980s, simply scavenging the stone from all over the location and not properly putting the place back together. This is called the Acapana Pyramid. It originally had 7 tiered levels, and it looks like it was covered over by some great cataclysm in the distant past, which is the subject of my book Aftershock, where I look at sites in Peru, Bolivia, Egypt, and Lebanon that show evidence that they were destroyed by an ancient cataclysmic event, all possibly at the same time, approximately 12,000 years ago. Tiwanaku is quite vast. It's about 2 hours drive from the capital city of La Paz, and is well worth visiting if you're in Bolivia. In fact, some people simply go to Bolivia only to see Tiwanaku. But there are other ancient sites in the area as well. This shows you the flatness of the Altiplano area, and here is a close-up examination of the archaeological work that has been done at the Acapana Pyramid itself, or more technically proper pyramidal structure. Again, 7 levels. You see in some cases the stone is quite tightly fitting, and in other cases it's kind of looks obviously rebuilt, and they had to dig over 8 feet of mud from these levels in order to find what the tiers looked like. And then this is the main and most famous part of Tiwanaku. That is the Gate of the Sun. It is one piece of granite-like or diorite-like stone. The quarry for it, and it weighs about 10 tons, is 70 kilometers or about 45 miles away. And also the gate is broken in half. That was not done recently or in historic times. That could have been the result of this massive cataclysm. And one final fly past the Gate of the Sun. And here we see it in more detail. As Gary, who's operating the quadcopter, and was much better in the beginning than I was, shows us different angles. You see the massive crack. You see lichen growing in that crack. A lot of weathering in that crack showing deep antiquity as to when it was broken. Our second to last site is Puma Punku. Puma Punku is part of the Tiwanaku complex, though it has a separate fence around it. Of course, it has been devastated by more than 1,000 years of destruction, starting possibly with the Aymara people, and then followed by the Spanish colonialists, and even up until recently, stones have been taken for use in construction in other buildings, which is a very sad event, but that's simply the case. No one knows how big Puma Punku originally was. Some people think that 90% of it has been removed, but I personally believe that most of the stones are still here because they're of such strange and irregular shape that they would not be very useful in terms of modern or European style construction. And again, there's evidence that the whole site was devastated by a cataclysmic event, possibly a wall of mud that covered the entire area, and that's why whenever you dig, or wherever you dig at Puma Punku, you find stone artifacts that look like they have been machined. It's estimated by some engineers who have visited the location that some of the stone cutting technology would be very difficult for us in the 21st century to do. So how could a Bronze Age culture like the Tiwanaku have possibly achieved this? It is one of the most enigmatic places on the planet. And finally, in the high jungle of Bolivia, we have Samaipata. And Samaipata means the high flat place. So it could have been named that by the Inca because they have constructions here, but this is highly unlikely to be Inca work that you're looking at. This is the top of the mountain, it's red sandstone, and the entire surface has been carved. The archaeologists believe that it was some obscure and forgotten culture from the Amazon jungle that did this work. But you would need something beyond Bronze Age technology to be able to do all of this cutting and carving. And there's little evidence that people in the Amazon in pre-colonial times had bronze tools, because bronze tends to be found in this area of the world in the Andes Mountains. And so again, we see extreme weathering on the surfaces, and no one knows what culture created this or when. I believe it is several thousand years old and looks honestly quite similar to some of the work that we find in Ollantaytambo in the Sacred Valley of Peru, and I'm referring to the megalithic works there, not the Inca work. Not that many tourists visit Samaipata, mainly Bolivians, but it's not very well known to the outside world. Very worth a visit. If you happen to be in Bolivia, you simply fly 1 hour from La Paz to the city of Santa Cruz, and then from there it's a 3-hour drive through and up into the high jungle to reach the mountaintop town called Samaipata. And it's a place of great mystery, and any place that I find enigmatic is one that I tend to go and visit several times, and this is definitely one of them.